guys, what's up? My name is Rudi-J, and today I'd like to introduce you to my mapping project, which I call the Elephant Mapping. It's actually a cross-link mapping for the VCI 400 Special Edition, the Machine MK1 and the VCR 2000. So in the next 30 minutes I'd like to take you to a tour to get acquainted with the main functionality of this mapping. And at the end I also provide a 4 minutes continuous mix. But before we start, I like to introduce you and talk a little bit about the concept I had in mind by using virtual ports, making use of Midi OX, and then I also will introduce you to the concept of Midi Linked Modifiers. So have a look, let's go!
First thing you will need is to install Loop B30. This is a shareware available at www.nerds.de that allows you to create, in this case, up to 16 virtual MIDI ports that sit between the actual hardware and Traktor. So the next thing you want to make sure is that for all involved controllers you are using the correct firmware and the customized settings. As far as the VCI 400 SE is concerned, fortunately on FlashFloater's mapping block there's still the option to downgrade to the version 1 firmware, which I'm using in this mapping. Next thing to look at is the VCR 2000, where I use the BC Manager from Mountain Utilities to configure the unit. I've included a configuration file in the zip file, so you just load this file into the tool and can program your controller straight away. So if you own a VCR 2000, I really recommend you to use this tool anyway, because it allows a real high level of customization. So what's left is Machine, and of course I also included a configuration file to be loaded into the native Instruments controller editor. So you load this file, and then as far as all the controllers are concerned, you're prepared. Now the only utilities which are actually present when Traktor is running are Loop B30 to define virtual MIDI ports and Midi OX, a utility which allows us to define routing path between real MIDI ports and virtual MIDI ports. So you may wonder, why is this so complex and what's actually the role of these virtual MIDI ports? First of all, to route from a real MIDI port via a virtual MIDI port into Traktor will allow you to adjust the MIDI traffic between Traktor and the device. And secondly, and this is mainly causing the complexity here, virtual MIDI ports are used to feedback the traffic coming out of Traktor back into Traktor, enabling inter-device communication. So let's have a closer look into one of these configuration files, in this case the Midi OX mapping translation file that adjusts the MIDI traffic coming from the effects knob of the VCI 400, enabling the later to be discussed super modes, where certain commands coming from these knobs are translated into other MIDI CC and nodes. So in the upper debugging window on the left, you can see the original input coming in from the VCI, and on the lower window, what's been done by Midi OX. And of course, let's have a look into Traktor, into the controller manager, where all the actual devices are then defined for Traktor. And as you can see, there are many of them, and they all take care of special jobs. For instance, here you can see 4 devices taking care of FX assignment. Then for Gratify, for each deck we have a separate device file. Also for the super knob too. For the slicer, we even have 3 devices per deck taking care of this complex functionality. Jog FX also is divided into several sub-devices communicating to each other. And finally, we have basic functionality for Machine and the equalizer control for BCR, which is special in this mapping. So lots of devices, lots of complex assignments. So I must admit the downside of this complexity is of course that before, as a developer, you go and concentrate on how you set up your mapping in a device file, you really need to understand all the assignments you made in Traktor and in MIDI-OX, and you need to understand how they work together. That's why I came up with this alternative representation of what's going on, where you have in blue all the traffic that's controlled in MIDI-OX and in orange all what's been done in Traktor. I'd like to draw your attention to the center of this image, where we have two virtual ports, 1 and 2, and MIDI traffic going to 4 Traktor devices, where obviously the MIDI traffic is being running in a feedback loop. So in particular, these MIDI feedback loops gave birth to the concept and idea of the so-called Midi Linked Modifiers. So what is a Midi Linked Modifier? It's actually a Traktor modifier that's been set up to output MIDI with a purpose to communicate to another device file. Or it's been a modifier that's been set up to receive MIDI that has been generated by another Traktor device file, or both. Let's have a look at the advantages. So the first one is global modifiers. Let's assume you have a mapping project where 8 modifiers are just not enough to handle the complexity. What you may want to do is to divide the job into various device files and then share the value of at least a few modifiers between those files. Let's have a look to the working principle. So in this example, we have 2 MIDI ports running in a loop with 3 device files. Imagine that in device A, modifier 1 will generate output CC commands from 100 to 107, exhibiting its current value. If then in device B and C you have appropriate input commands, you can share the value of M1 between those devices. What can be regarded as an implementation of global modifiers. Now let's move on to the next advantage, which is to capture any of Traktor MIDI out information into a modifier for further processing. For instance, in this mapping, the master sync LEDs on the VCI will blink in different frequency according to master or sync status of the deck. And this is implemented by just outputting the master status to a CC and then feedback that information back into the same device, reading it out into a modifier to do the same with the sync status of the deck, and then to use both information for controlling the blinking frequency. The final merit of these MIDI linked modifiers is that they will allow you to control the sequence of processing in your mapping. And this feature has been heavily used in the implementation of the dynamic mode of the slicer, where we have to control beat jumps, turn on and off the flux mode, all in a controlled sequence. Again, here is a concept illustration of how this works. So this is again a device that sends its own output via MIDI-OX to its input again. Let's assume modifier 1 is 0. Then a CC10 is coming in, which causes the device to set M1 to 1. If M1 is 1, it will output a CC11. This returns back to the input and causes the modifier to attain a value of 2, which causes to output CC12, and so on and so on. The good thing is that Traktor will process this feedback loop as fast as possible. And the only thing you need to do in order to implement, for instance, a sequence of beat jumps is to hook into these CCs. So for instance, jump 4 beats on CC11, jump 2 beats on CC12, and 1 beat on CC13 to form a jump of 7. So even if you probably don't use this mapping, maybe these MIDI linked modifiers may inspire you to create your own mappings, making use of virtual MIDI ports and MIDI-OX. You anxiously may also wonder whether all this causes appropriate latency for Traktor. But fortunately this is not the case, because we are still running at 7 milliseconds latency, which you can see here. So if you are really interested and want to go into this, I really recommend you to download the mapping, which includes the instruction manual that not only explains the installation of the mapping and how to use it in very much detail, but also gives you a nice overview about the implementation concept that led to this elephant mapping. Well, then enough about theory, and let's go directly into this mapping. In the following chapters, I will introduce you into the main features though. So in this example, a static light for deck B indicates whether deck B is in sync or not. The short blinking frequency for the LED for deck A indicates that A is the master. If sync is also switched on, the frequency remains the same, but the lit period will be longer. If you want to blend two tracks into another using the equalizer attractor, you need to make sure that there is no frequency clash in the high, mids and lows. And as you can see here, the BCR can automatically take care of it, as if you increase the frequency on one deck, it automatically decreases the frequency on the other deck. You can also see that the point where both frequencies have the same level is different for high, mids and lows. It's even possible to control 4 knobs in Tractor using just one knob of the BCR. So your free hand will then be available to control effects, or as in this case the filter. Next comes loop control for decks, beat juggling in flux mode and some basic sample control on VCI and machine. So basically I inherited the functionality for DEX loop control from Flash Flooder's initial mapping, and for the beat juggling I mainly use a pad page on the machine. As I'm also using a Control F1, I didn't take the effort to make a complete mapping for the remix deck on the VCI machine. However, basic sample control is available on both of these controllers. So now let's move on to some more fancy stuff which we have implemented here on machine. In the pad pages A and B, which work with the tractor current deck. Down here we have 4 velocity sensitive pads, and these pads control scratching. So finally we have scratching for dummies now available on machine. With these two here you can move the play position to the left and to the right, like this. So I go to a cue point first, this one here, and then to the right and to the left. And the ones down here do the same, but they even also control the crossfader at the same time. I can cut out 1/2 of the movement. So how can this be used in mix? For instance, we can start a hip-hop track with a typical baby scratch. And then we can activate flux and also scratch in between. Pressure sensitive pads can also be used for effects control, and this has been as well implemented here into 4 separate pad pages. The special issue of the implementation of the Gratify section in the performance area of the VCI is not just that it has 27 banks, but also that the activation of each button and the functionality associated depends on how many other buttons are pressed simultaneously. We just saw a beat roll using the beat measure, some gator effects. Now as we turn to the bank 2, we got a demonstration of the so-called hard-ridden delay. In bank 3, the level of the third group parameter is influenced by the master beat. This is basically a do-it-yourself LFO for the third parameter that can be nicely combined with manual FX control on the BCR, as you see here in this demonstration. Bank 4 is completely dedicated to various presets for the delay effect. For instance, here we can sing Adele in a canon with herself.
I heard that you settled down, that you found a girl, married now. I heard that your dreams came true. Guess she dreamed everything. Guess she dreamed everything I didn't give to you.
As it was true for the other side, when I switch the VCI controller between decks A and C, it will recall the association of the decks and the settings of Gratify, including bank and super mode. We are now in bank 5, where we have the phaser and single effects mode. In each of the 8 presets, upon activation the LFO will be reset. Bank 6 is for transpose stretch, and bank 7 is populated with 32 presets for the autobounds that are all killed upon release of the buttons. And finally, for the macro effects, we have the bank 8, which is divided in 4 sub-banks. Each of those sub-banks has again 5 sub-sub-banks. So this in total will result in 20 banks, and together with the other 7 banks results in 27 banks in total. So in bank 8, the buttons are only used to load macro effects. Next you see the implementation of forum member Steve's isolator FX in combination with super knob FX control. Upon a push of a single button on machine, pre-selected frequencies can be copied to deck D, whereas the effect is only applied to deck B. And to get rid of the isolation, including resetting the equalizer, is super easy as well. The enhanced capability and functionality now available in JogFX is actually the main reason why this mapping is a combined VCI machine solution. When JogFX is activated, the buttons in the transplant section will load presets, but they can also be used to switch for a given preset between different modes of velocity for the parameter control. As demonstrated here for the ramp delay parameter, the starting point for each of the parameters can be manually defined when vinyl has been switched off. Once the jog wheel is depressed and the effect is activated, it's also possible to adjust parameter values on the fly using the thumb and the buttons in the transport section. Up to here, all group effects became activated-deactivated at the same time. But now we switch to a different preset on machine, where the group effects are activated one after the other. How does that work? And this is where the knobs on machine come in. For instance, we have a knob here controlling the threshold for the first group button activation, in this case the beat measure, and we set that one to 80%. The source level that is measured here is the current value of dry wet. Hence, the beat measure will only be activated when dry wet has reached 80%. Now we set the source sensing to a different mode. We're still looking to dry wet and set the threshold to 80%, but now we're looking for deactivation. So the effect will get deactivated once the level has exceeded 80%. So in total we have 8 modes, and we can adjust the activation for each of the group effects individually. The knob labeled left allows us to bring in additional effect unit, in this case FX1. And finally, the job sensitivity allows to adjust the decay, that is the speed in which dry wet is attenuated, and finally, upon release of the jog wheel, the entire effect is turned off. So then let's have mercy, release that loop and go for the build-up. In static mode, the slicer will allow to jump in cue to a position near your current cue point. So +3 beat, +6, +7. In dynamic mode, the LED feedback looks like a step sequencer. You can jump to individual positions and create loops on the fly. To better understand what's actually going on here, let's analyze the 16 last beats in super slow motion. So, as the music plays, the beats pass by. We are now at position 3, position 4, as you see also in the illustration above. And now when we are at position 5, we jump to position 7. And only just now flux mode is activated. Then by pressing an additional button, we enter a loop that is a half beat long. What happens next when all buttons are released is, due to flux mode, the play position will be restored before flux mode, and then flux mode is switched off. An additional beat jump will make sure we end up at the same position where we started off. So we have passed the first 8 beat sequence, now we're entering the second one. We are again at beat position 3, 4, and when we are at 5, we also press button number 5. The length of the initial loop we are ending up in is always defined by the standard loop length. In this case here, by the second press of the button, we adjust that length and go to a shorter interval. Again, upon release, flux is released, and also here we end up in our original grid. The grid that has been just activated here in the performance section can be seen as an extension of the Gratify. With the beat slicer loaded as the effect, you can also adjust it with the FX knob in super mode. So what really makes fun is to combine this all together.
To show our appreciation for your support.
Before we play out the demo, let me allow to talk a bit about track selection and forget about technology for a moment. You may probably have noticed that I'm kind of fan of drum and bass music. I found June Miller's Walls of Jericho in Techie's drum and bass thread and wanted always to do something with it. I actually looked up the story in the Bible and I found out that's actually a story about a war massacre. God first asked Joshua to follow an exact protocol of war preparation, like going around the city in a certain sequence, with some very special instructions for the 7th day, the day where the wall of Jericho has to come down. Joshua's people followed those instructions exactly. The wall came down and then they rushed into the city, and it said they devoted the city to the Lord and they destroyed with the sword every living thing in it, man and woman, young and old, cattle, sheep, and even the donkeys. So frankly speaking, to me, this is just an example how far people can get once they are fanatic. So for the demo, I was looking for an a cappella track that had the same kind of fanatic energy in it. So I found this one here from Ian Carey. That's been used in a house context before. Lucky enough, this track is also available as a pure a cappella. In particular, the upcoming The Power Shout attracted my attention. So here's the plot for the upcoming mix. I load the main tracks on decks A and B so that I have deck C as a remix sticks available for samples that I can twist with the gratify settings I load into FX Unit 1. Then in preparation of the drop I start the Preacher's Speak, and I will make deck A the tempo master because here I want to use delay effects. In particular I want to catch the shout "the power" in a jog FX delay and then ramp it up, like the power, the power, the power, the power, the power, into the drop. And then here in the main part I will assign all effects unit to deck B. I will use the autobounds activated by buttons or super knobs. I will use the grid activated by buttons or super knobs, jog FX, and also FX modulated by pads. This part here starts with the gator effect, even though no sound is playing, creating a stuttering sound, and then I use two of Moldova's guitar sounds in order to twist it with the same FX combo I used right in the beginning. For preparation of the final drop, I then try to catch again a few Preacher's key statements, this time with a transposed stretch to really underline the phonetic mood of his words. The finish is facilitated by a jog delay on the right wheel where all decks are assigned to. That's pretty much it.
The form of godliness and the rituals and the routines. When is somebody going to get hungry for God and say, Lord, I just want to know you. I'm not worried about the car. I'm not worried about the house. And I'm not worried about going on the cruise. I want to know you. Oh, that I may know him in the fellowship of his suffering and the power of his resurrection. 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 Something about the power of God. Yeah, the power will make you walk right. Power to make you talk right. His power will make you live right. I know one thing. If it had not been for the power of God, I don't know where I might be. I don't care where you are today. I don't care what you may be going through. I don't care if your friends turn their back on you. Your family might put you out. You may even lose you to know that it will be nothing, and I mean nothing, but the power of God that will bring you out.